Shabbat Shalom. Is that too loud? Is it all right? Greg held it further away from him. That might be, it does sound kind of loud. I appreciate the voice amplification because for some reason I seem to lose my voice. I'm going to read a story in Genesis 16, and it won't be lost on any of you that really what this story seems to be about is something that's never mentioned. Have you ever been aware of a story where the most important point of the story is not mentioned? It's so you figure out. And this story never mentions waiting on the Lord, but that's what it's about. Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. And she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children." Don't you love how she phrases that? "Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight." So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. I don't know about the rest of you. When I read that first 6 verses, Abram almost appears to be a victim to me. So Sarai had mistreated Hagar, and she left. Now the angel of the Lord found her, that's Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. He said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going?" And she said, "I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai." Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority." Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count." The angel of the Lord said to her further, "Behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man, his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live to the east of all his brothers." Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God who sees." For she said, "Have I even remained alive here after seeing him?" Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. I don't know about the rest of you. A lot of times I wish when God gave us stories that he gave us editorial notes. Because I put a lot of stuff in this story. I thought it was interesting that God is concerned about Hagar and that he actually sends the angel of the Lord to talk to her. And I don't know, there's a lot of discussion, even arguing about the identity of the angel of the Lord. Many people believe it's Yeshua. If you go through the Torah and really the whole Old Testament, you'll find the angel of the Lord appearing, and generally what it will be is God or God's delegated authority appearing in some kind of visible fashion. In any case, we don't need to worry about that other than to know that the angel of the Lord represented God to Hagar, and he had pity on her, he had comfort. The odd thing to me is her son will have a tremendous number of descendants, but you get this sense that they will be challenged with division, contention. I don't know about you. If someone says he'll be a wild donkey of a man, every man's hand against his brother's, it sounds a little bit too much like what we see in the world. But Ishmael, however you want to look at it, really, that's just a Hebrew word that means God hears. El is God, Shema, Ishmael, just God hears. It's a good name.
I would have found myself saying, does he really have to be a wild donkey?
Well, and I think it's really hard to know, maybe impossible to know exactly why God does things and what for. In this story, what comes out to you that's really being communicated? Because the whole story has been starting from Genesis 12, that God has come to Abram and he said, through your seed, I'm going to bless the entire world. From you will come a people that basically will redeem the earth. I don't know about the rest of you, but being patient is not a virtue a lot of us possess. How long had it been since God had promised them an heir? It had been 10 years. That's quite a while. Not to mention that at this time, Abram is 85. And by the time Ishmael is born, he's 86. And so, if you had to give me a brief description, why did Sarai, or probably really more Sarai, and Sarai, Sarah, they both mean princess. That's the meaning of that name. But what impelled her to have Abram take Hagar?
She was too old to have children.
Well, I think that's true. But what's the overarching need in Sarai's life? She wants an heir. Ron. So, and I know I want to be careful with this, but do you think it's possible to have a word from God, and when things don't go on schedule, that you try to help God? To me, I think that is a part of human existence. I think we do it all the time. Greg's been talking about waiting upon the Lord. When I read this passage, the thing that just stands out to me as Abram, who is a friend of God, who talks to God, who is an exemplary character, he gets in a position where it doesn't look like patience is going to be the way to accomplish what needs to be done. He's going to get in and help. Kaya.
There's also a picture of fruitfulness comes from intimacy with God. Sarah is trying to produce the fruitfulness from somebody else's intimacy. And I think if we're not careful, we try and produce the promise of God in our life by trying to get other people's intimacy with God, and He's calling us to replace the intimacy with Him.
That's quite an amazing observation, Kai. Did you hear what Kaya said? I think that's really spot on. She wanted Abram's and Hagar's intimacy to produce a son to make her feel better. But really, the only way for her to have an heir is through her own intimacy. And it's difficult because in this case, God wasn't doing His part in her view. Did you pick that up in the story? God has prevented me from bearing children. And I thought it was kind of interesting that she really, Abram, you need to take care of this. And then when things started to go south, Abram, this is your fault. And I was thinking, is this a commentary on husband-wife relations? I won't go too far with that one. But, it does say, and I didn't read it, the last, that Hagar bore Abram a son, and he was 86 years old when she bore Ishmael to him. And so I don't want to point the finger at Abram, because one of the things I do recognize when you look at biblical characters, and James makes the comment that Elijah was a man just like us. And on a certain sense, I realize that's true. On another sense, I want to be very careful thinking I'm in the realm of an Elijah or an Abram. These are special people. These are people whose walk with God is incredible, unparalleled. And so I don't feel like I'm in a position to criticize Abram. I just have some questions. And I think what we see in this story, God making a promise, the promise doesn't seem to be coming about, so reaching in to help it along seems to me very common. We do this as human beings. It's something that happens to us. And so I got thinking about this, and I've been thinking about it a lot because it was kind of in last week's Torah portion too, and that what allows us or what gives us the ability to be faithful, to be strong. Greg's been talking about waiting on the Lord, taking time. And I think for a lot of us, why have these been so successful? What is it about a phone? It lets you keep doing something. What's the first thing that needs to be shut off if you're going to have a quiet time with God?
Or with anybody.
Well, no, so that's not true. My granddaughters sit next to each other and text each other.
I know.
But I mean, how many of you find that it's very difficult to stop everything and just say, "You're my shield, you're my protector. What's up, God?" Sometimes the thoughts, but have you noticed that one of the things that God tells us to be still, to be quiet? And I think about this a lot because to be faithful, to be loyal is something that's very godly. In fact, it tells us God cannot be faithless. He's faithful. And, Gerald has a favorite cartoon he tells me about when you get in a hurry to do something. And in this cartoon, there's an old dead tree and two vultures are sitting in it. And they're looking out over the landscape and they're saying, "What's the value in patience? Let's go kill something." And, it makes me laugh because it probably is the far side. But it makes me laugh because it's such a perfect picture. You're a vulture, you eat carrion, but you're going to make something happen. There's that thing in us. And also, Kai and I were talking a little bit last night, and what Greg's been emphasizing, I've thought about this, being faithful and being able to endure, to wait, to be able to find, because, I remember reading stories about men. John the Baptist is a classic one. God blesses his ministry. There are some people that think that he may have preached to 1 million people in his short ministry. He didn't have a big microphone to TV. And yet, the end of his life was in a prison. And he eventually loses his head because he told somebody the truth. And how does a person in that situation stay strong? Is God still with him? I love the song that Charla played and reading those words, and I had never heard the story behind it. And this is the thing that comes to me, and that's why I've really appreciated it on a lot of levels, but one level I've appreciated what Greg's been trying to tell us is God is with me when it's bad just as much as when it's good. And if my relationship with Him is strong, then I'll know that even when it's bad, He's there. He's holding my hand. He has a purpose for me. I am not abandoned. Because if I can be convinced I'm abandoned, I'm going to behave like an orphan. And if I believe, what am I? I'm a son. I'm an heir. These promises are mine. And you ever read the story of John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress? Do you know how many years he rotted in prison? And he went through some of the same soul searching. You know, what good am I doing here? And he went through some of these same things. God's here with me in the prison. He still loves me. And there's a great story that I ran into on the internet. You know, Facebook isn't all bad. But in 1936, and you know, this is sad. I don't remember if it's South Dakota or North Dakota, but you can find out. There was a sheep herder that got sick outside the little town of Benton, and I think it's South Dakota. But they brought him into the hospital, and it was a little hospital in that town, and a dog, old nondescript dog, followed him in. They called him Shep. And a nun saw the dog very concerned about its master, and so she fed him and took care of him while this sheep herder was very sick, and then he died. And his family was all in the east. His family sent for his body. He was put in a casket and put on the train there in Benton, and he went away. And as they were putting the casket on the train, this dog was there and started to whimper, and they closed the doors. And this poor dog, of course, where'd my master go? That dog showed up at the railroad station 4 times a day for 5.5 years. Every train that came in, it checked to see if its master was there. I read this and I was just... And I thought, why was the dog so faithful? And it's easy. He loved him. He did this in the cold. This was 40 below place. The dog was old when the man died. And the station people were so taken in by the dog's loyalty, they took care of him, they fed him, they loved the dog, but that dog was... And then one day, as the dog was getting so old and so decrepit, it couldn't hear. And it was out on the tracks waiting for the train, and it didn't hear the train. Saw it too late, and it was hit. 5.5 years. And the dog was buried. There's a monument in Benton to this dog, because we all recognize that love that never lets go, that circumstances do not affect it, do not change it. And I thought, what in the world? Why are we learning from dogs?
Why not?
Well, but I mean, here's the thing I find interesting. Everybody knows in that story why the dog is faithful. It's love. The love is unconditional. It doesn't change. He doesn't know why his master left. He's just going to keep looking. And in a certain sweet way, I don't know what happened to pets. Maybe he's back with his owner now. I don't know. All I know is that the story transfixed me, because we so often try to do things out of a sense of duty. But if you love, you do them. You don't have to be told what to do. And when you look at our service to the Lord, one of the things I think that happens to us sometimes, we get distant. It starts to become a relationship where we perform. And so we think, well, God, I said my prayers this morning, I did my work, I did this, so I need you to bless me. And the concept of a relationship, we gradually grow away from. And it's not on purpose, we don't realize it, but suddenly we're serving an idea, not a person. Where it's not a relationship. See, and when I hear Greg say what he does about a quiet time, and I know for me, a quiet time is hard. I want to be doing something. I want to be reading, I want to be studying, I want to be listening, writing, and to just sit And my wife could tell you this. I have learned after 44 years of marriage that there are certain things that feed joy's spirit. One of them is for me to be quiet and just sit with her, to just talk, to just be there. She loves to sit and watch a drippy movie with her husband. She likes that. And the thing is that I love her enough that I enjoy doing the things that feed her soul. Because if I feed her soul, I'm fed. And what I'm starting to realize is that my relationship with God is no different. What feeds his soul, what nurtures him, nurtures me, and if we don't have a relationship, it becomes a bunch of duty and performance, and you'll get tired. Greg, you had your hand up.
Same thought has come to me too. And I was thinking about this in various people around the community. When's the last time you just sat down and enjoyed the presence of somebody?
Next question.
I didn't respond. It's a long time. And God saying that's what I want you to do. I just want you to join me. I want you to delight to be in my presence. I don't want you to necessarily, asking me for things, that's great. I want you to ask for something. But more than anything else, I want you to just come and be with me, to love me. I thought that was so powerful to think that. But then, not only with God, but with each other, is that I want to enjoy people. And I don't. I want to, but that's a tough one for me.
Don't you think it's like a lot of things that we all, like when we get together for whatever kind of at a community picnic, or we always enjoy being with each other. We enjoy the fellowship. But we sometimes forget that it requires some kind of discipline. And that's one of the things that comes out to me in the story, and I'll just share this, and I'm interested in what you have to say, is that I think Abram and Sarai, now God used Ishmael, and God loved Ishmael and Hagar. Let's not be messed up here. But on the other hand, it feels to me like Abram and Sarai did something they felt impelled to do. They had to do it. It wasn't something they sat and reflected and said, this is a good idea. And I'll put it in terms that make sense to me. How many of you have to work growing weeds in your yard? The weeds grow. They're there. If you want peas, flowers, melons, you are going to have to do something intentional. You're going to have to take the time to prepare the soil, to plant the seeds, to fertilize, to water. It will take time, but it will produce something. When I look at the things of the Spirit, they tend to be planned. They tend to be orchestrated, cultivated. Kai and I were talking about this a little. When Paul describes the flesh and the Spirit, if you noticed, he called it the fruits of the Spirit and the works or the deeds of the flesh. They just happen. How many of you have sat down and thought about it? So-and-so irritates me, I'm going to blow up. No, you irritate me, so I blow up. I don't need to think about it. That's a weed. That's just, I'm impelled. I must do it. And I've seen people say, I've got to go deal with this. When maybe the thing would be to stop and say, Lord, what should I do here? What would be the right thing? And he might just say, shut up. But that's not what I want to do. I'm impelled, I'm driven. And I think we need to be very careful, at least when I look at this story, that Sarai felt driven to do this. If I don't do something, I'm not going to have an heir. And I have a hunch that whenever we feel like we must, we're compelled, we have no way out, or the Flip Wilson's famous line, the devil made me do it. Those are the times we need to back off and say, this would be a good time to wait. This would be a good time to just maybe stop and think a minute. And also, Lord, you've been growing some things in my life. This might be a place where you want to allow me to show the fruit or the result of abiding. Sister Colleen and then Lois.
You know, worried after 10 years nothing's going to happen. But then after she did what she did, God had her wait for 15 more.
I know it. And sometimes you think, Lord, are you just being cruel? Or how many of you think God did things exactly on the schedule they needed to be? Have you ever realized that when we get impatient like that, what we're saying is, God, I don't like how you do things? Lois, had your hand up.
I've been walking in the shade, and I like to walk around the orchard because it's always shade of the sun. And I go and I look at all the trees, and I think at the first of the year when Brother Doug got up and says, we're not watering these trees anymore because they're no good, and we're, nobody.
We haven't had a crop for 3 years. Why water?
5 years, and we bought an apple juicer, and I'm not even going to turn the water on. You look in there and you're going, good grief, look at all of them.
I know it makes all of us laugh.
I don't know, probably some of them aren't good trees still, but I think God sometimes, in the midst of where we go, we're giving up. I mean, the years that He's nursed those along, been out there in February and had, and when the conditions are right, I mean, they probably needed to be thinned or whatever, but, it's incredible to see that, because I think of it every time I walk by that thing. His words come back to me going, let's just not even turn the water on those apple trees this year.
I think we all laugh because we all made up our minds and God showed us we don't know much. But it's a good example of what I want to just spend a moment here. And that is, for Abram and Sarai to experience the blessing that God had promised them, there was one thing they had to do. That's to remain husband and wife and live together. And it did require this waiting. But can you see, it couldn't have happened if they said, we're old, let's stop living together. No, that was all they could do, and wait, and just believe in God's goodness. And something, Greg, you were just talking about spending time with people. I find that I struggle with that a little bit too, but here's the thing. I think that it's companion to being able to spend time with God. If you can spend time with God, you'll find your ability to spend time with people, which is exposing myself here. Because what I notice in these stories where the flesh takes over, people become, and this is my word, objectified. Do you know what I mean by that? They become things to get what I want. Look what Sarai did in this story. She didn't think about how this would affect Abram or Hagar. She wanted an heir for herself. So she put Hagar and Abram in a... I mean, how would you like that? Oh, you're my maid. You're now going to be my husband's wife. What's my vote? You a vote? Your thing. You're going to do something and make me get what I want. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you didn't really think about it, but suddenly people became objects to give you what you wanted? And if they didn't do what you wanted to get what you want, you become angry with them. You talk about this man who drove through all those people in Nice. What were all those people to him? Objects. They were things to destroy. They weren't little children, old men, old women. They weren't fathers, mothers, sisters. They weren't people. And this is something that I think the Lord shows us, that when we spend time with Him and we have this relationship with the Holy Spirit, we see His people as valuable human beings. The minute we objectify, we're getting into this fleshly reaction, impulsive, compulsive thing.
I think with Hagar, can you imagine, I've read that story, but can you imagine that she said, you go into Abraham and then this is my heir? It's kind of like asking a woman to give up a baby. I mean, you go have a baby. But, I mean, in the implication of that story, I think she was supposed to give the baby over to Sarah. No wonder she despised her, you know. But it's
Well, then when Hagar got pregnant, what did she do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and I've seen it, I think we all see it in our own lives. I mean, when we take it into our own hands, we have a consequence. And you'd like to say, God, please take this consequence away. Why didn't, I mean, how dare you? How could you? How could you make life so difficult for me when I went against you and now you gave me the consequence? And, you know, you look at, I often think of the whole story of Ishmael because, in a way, I think we all believe we're still living with that. And, I mean, you go, God, why did you give us such a big consequence? It doesn't seem fair.
Well, remember something Yeshua said? He said, the Spirit gives birth to spirit, and the flesh gives birth to flesh. And that's why when I look at the story, and again, I'm trying to be careful not to judge them, and yet at the same time I look at their actions, and I think we want to really be careful when we do things that come out of what I would call impulse, or we feel like we must. We feel like we have no choice, because the Holy Spirit gives us a choice. We can choose. And and there are so many examples that I looked at in Scripture. What's interesting is this is part of Israel's history. Abram and Sarai did this with Hagar, but then look what Leah and Rachel did with Jacob. Wasn't the identical thing? Rachel says, Leah's had 4 sons, I have none. Oh, you're my handmaid. Which one is it? Bilhah. You go into Jacob and raise up children for me. Those children were hers. And the interesting thing is, I'm always like, I have this crazy analytical mind. I'm going, what does Jacob and Bilhah think about this? Doesn't matter. And it's been helpful for me in this sense that if we come to the place of waiting upon the Lord, seeking His counsel, I don't believe we'll ever go to that place where we use people as pawns to get what we want. And it's very human. And one of the things I've noticed with a good employer, it's good business to treat your employees like people. They do a better job for you, but I've noticed some people can't do that. Their employees are things that get them what they want. And if those employees don't do what they want, they treat them harshly, fire them. I mean, there's no sense of humanity. We can't do this in the kingdom. There are so many examples in Scripture where we find people stepping into what I'd call this realm of the flesh, and there's probably so many different ways you could describe it. But it's that thing that says, I have to do this. There's no way I can keep myself from it, whether it's an outburst of rage, it's a put down. There are a lot of different things that we can do. You know, I think another one that you would all remember was Saul, when he was supposed to go have this battle against the Philistines, and Samuel told him, wait on this mountain, I'll come and I'll do the sacrifice. Well, Samuel was detained a little. And here's the interesting thing. Saul looked out, and what were the men doing? They're milling and they're getting nervous, and at least it looks like to Saul they're getting ready to leave. So what does Saul do? He goes ahead and does the sacrifice. What had God told him he was to do? He was to wait. And I read this, I realized inside of me is this thing that says, God, I can't trust your plan. If your plan doesn't match up what I want, I've got to rush in and help you. And what's funny? It never works. It never has good children. But we do it. It never has. Greg was talking about, I think it's John 15. And Jesus actually says it several different ways. But in John 15, he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Which is to say, if you're not connected to the life-giving sap, you don't have any life. But we attempt to, and we plant thorns, and then we can't understand why they're not grapes. Bob Mumford's famous quote, I sowed wild oats and then I prayed for crop failure. But, so Saul went ahead and made this sacrifice, and that was the point at which God said, Saul, I'm not going to be able to use you and your line as the kings in Israel. You're more concerned about what looks good to you, what feels good to you, and even in the situations where Samuel confronted him, both here and then with the war with the Amalekites, in both cases Saul didn't do what God asked. You would find when Samuel would rebuke him, all Saul was concerned about was do something so I look good in front of the people. I don't want to look bad in front of the people. Show me some kind of respect. And I thought, how much like our flesh to be concerned about that, not that I've broken my relationship with God. And I think that happens. It can happen to me. It only happens because my relationship with God was already tenuous. It was not strong. See, Abram's not like that. He'll occasionally stray, but his connection with God is so strong, he always comes back. Okay.
The idea that Paul, in some of the, I don't remember where it is, but anyway, he puts it in very stark, sharp language, where he says, I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Christ lives in me. And I've always thought that was kind of an interesting thing. To absolutely, and without remorse, without hesitation, is to crucify the old self, his old nature. And I think it goes along with what you're saying. Until that happens, my relationship with the Lord is going to be somewhat limited. But as that process, and it is a process, that process continues to go on, where this self is put out of the way and crucified by my waiting upon the Lord, then truly that life does spring up, and it's wonderful. But going through the process of crucifixion is not pleasant. Pleasant is not even right. I mean, it's horrifying to even think that, but it's true. Just one of those little things. Sometimes as I've been praying, I like the sound of my voice. And so boy, that sounds great. Boy, Lord, what do you think about this? This is good. This is good stuff. And I think you ought to listen to it, Lord, because as I'm praying at it, this is so good that I think that you should give it. And I was chastised on that one. It's true. Where even as I'm praying, or even as I'm worshiping, or if I just worship a little bit more potently, with a little bit more gesticulation, as the hair stands up on the back of my neck, that's a
You've got to answer this.
Of your spirit, Lord, that's moving mightily on me. And I can just say, oh, would you wake up, Ray?
Isn't it funny, though, that being human beings, sometimes this division between spirit and flesh can be hard to recognize. We don't realize what's happened to us. And I think that's why that this whole concept of waiting or being patient becomes very much a part of what we need to do on it.
Well, the other thing that brings things that kind of like Ray was saying about the whole story was that God had Sarah and Abraham, wait to the point where there was no question that was his doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was...
Because sometimes when we want God to do something for us, we're not willing to wait to the point where it's past any way that it could be recognized as something I could accomplish on my own. That he wants the glory and he wants the honor. And sometimes we're waiting and we don't want to wait to the point where it's past our years. It's past our ability. As long as we're able to do it on our own fleshly nature, then it's not God.
Well, it's interesting. It is God, but we tend to we want to take the credit for it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, remember when God called Gideon. And Gideon put out the call for troops, and how many showed up? I think 30,000. And Gideon's going, this isn't even half of what Midian has. And what does God come and tell him? This is way too many. If you win with these, you'll think you did it. So he says, send all the ones that are afraid home. Now, that's kind of scary. 22,000 go home. I mean, I always think about the story and think, it's so easy to sit back here and think, well, Gideon, where's your faith? I mean, I just imagine myself going, and then, he sorts them out with the way they drink the water, and he ends up with 300. And it's exactly like you're saying. With 300, Gideon now knew this was God's battle. It wasn't his. And all he could do was be faithful. And what's amazing is how much easier it is to talk about this than it is to live it.
Oh, it's amazing the 300 didn't suddenly get afraid and decide to go on.
Well, I'd say this 300 were pretty special people. Well, and I think about this happening, and just some thoughts that I have, and every person will be unique. Lois's comment about the fruit trees, I think, are very important. I don't know just what God was doing. Something this year, this is the year of Jubilee. Are you all aware of that? This is the year of Jubilee. What's interesting is that the level of fruitfulness. I've never seen as many lilacs in my life as we had this year. Never. I've seen a couple of good years. And then the fruit trees. Like we were saying, the fruit trees in the orchard, they haven't had any fruit on them, one or two, for it's a long time. But here's the thing. If we didn't have the trees, they couldn't have borne fruit this year. That's what the Lord's been showing me. You've got to plan just like Abraham and Sarah. So maybe you can't do anything, but you keep living together as husband and wife. You've got to be careful, because for God to show His hand, there are things we need to have prepared in our lives. And, I've thought about this a lot, and there are several things that are very unique this year. I mentioned over at supper the other day, 11. This is a year of 11. I don't know why. It's my 44th anniversary. Darrell turned 44. Kenneth turned 33. Rob and Jeanette have been married 33 years. Tom and Janelle have been married 22. Johnny and Catherine have been married 11. I mean, one day I was sitting there, and it was just like the Lord wanted me to see this. Like 20 things showed up that were 11. What's 11? I don't know totally, but what's interesting, in Scripture generally, 11 means we're just about to become whole.
Great. I have 11 mice in my car.
I'm not sure that's a good example. 11 mice in your car. Whew.
Now your car is complete.
One more and it's, But, so some things that I think you all know what it says in Galatians. Paul contrasts the deeds or the works of the flesh with the fruit of the Spirit. And I think this is something that's come to me as Greg has talked about waiting on the Lord, and I have some of those scriptures. God's working in our lives. I can't do this without God. Apart from me, you cannot do nothing is real. You can't breathe. You can't go to the bathroom. You have to have God. The difference is, do you recognize where the power came from? And are you going to that power source? Because there is a side of us that does what's easy or convenient, and that is what is called the works of the flesh. Listen to them. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident: immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. Now, what did you pick out of that when he was listing those things, you'll notice all of those are things that come out of us without planning. Those are things that come out of us without forethought. Even idolatry, when you look at it, people fall into idolatry because they don't want to worship God. Or they don't know how. There's an ignorance. If you take the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, notice how every one of those is a plant. It's something that you plant the seed in your life, and then you have to do something to cultivate it and take care of it. And that something is to abide. Because the love of God, how many of you have tried to make yourself love someone or something? Doesn't work. But you will love if you connect yourself to the source of all love. Did you notice in that list of the deeds of the flesh how many of the things had to do with division between people? Listen to this again. Outbursts of anger, jealousy, strife, enmities, disputes, dissensions, factions. How much of a spiritual genius do you need to be to deduce that our political system is full of the deeds of the flesh? An interesting thing that I noticed, there's a writing in 150 that says that there will be a people preparing to receive the light of the seventh day. And then later on in that chapter it says, my people will see me in the flesh. They'll see me in other people. And what I realized is revelation is seeing Yeshua, Jesus, in people. The flesh can see what's wrong with people. So if you go on Facebook or the internet and you hate Obama, you can find a gazillion things that people are harping on that Obama did badly. Or the same with Hillary, or the same with Trump. And people rehearse these things until suddenly we find... You look at that thing that happened in Nice yesterday, and this mental illness and all the rest. But how many of you recognize that this man had a fire in his flesh and he kept feeding that fire? He kept pouring gasoline on something in him that was dissension, strife. Can you sense at anything that he did, love, joy, peace, goodness, faith? No, of course you don't. But are you aware that you and I have that opportunity to connect ourselves to Yeshua, to Jesus, or to allow our body to do what it wants? You don't have to think about being immoral. That comes easy. That's how you're wired. The difference is to discipline yourself and to see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. And it's not a perfect analogy, but like I just told you, if you want to see a field of alfalfa out on this desert, you're going to have to take intentional, proactive measures. You're going to brush it. You're going to prepare the soil, perhaps fertilize it. You're going to plant it. You're going to water it. You're going to do all these things, and then you probably will take measures to destroy the competition. You'll take measures to put down the weeds. Because you know very well if you went out there and took off the brush and just watered it, weeds would grow fine. There's something, when you go back to our story with Abram, it's a very common thing for us to see a spiritual promise. It doesn't appear to be happening the way we would like, and we get into the flesh. And like I said, one of the first things that I would mention is if you start treating people like objects and things, then you've gotten out of the Spirit. Because God created every human being. He loves every person. They're His son or His daughter. And that, I think a classic example is Moses and Aaron. The people were whining about not having water, and they were complaining to Moses, and you know, Moses has a lot of patience. The Lord says, go over to this rock and speak, and I'll give the people water. Moses goes over to the rock, and he's so angry with the people that he strikes the rock and says, must we get water from this rock? I mean, he completely disrespects God. He completely is angry with the people. They're just a group of idiots that he needs to mollify. And in doing that, God says, you didn't show me as holy. You're not going in. Which I don't know if he ever was going in my opinion. So if you understand that, people cannot be objects. People cannot be a means to getting what we want. Even though we work together and we depend upon each other, we can't ever lose sight of the fact that people are valuable, made in the image of God. The other thing is striking out to do something because we feel impelled to do it, we must do it, it has to happen now. I'd be really careful. Because, again, I literally can have kochia grow up in my yard in a matter of days. If I want apples, it's going to take me years. Because that's how fruit comes. Now I realize that the Lord can bring instant love, joy, and peace into a situation. When we wait on Him and come into His Spirit, those things are there. We don't have to wait for it. But just something to be thinking about. Sometimes, we give sermons on Abram when we pick on him, and I realize he's a giant of the faith. But I can learn from this story that generally God doesn't need help. That when He really wants to show that He did it, like you said, Ron, He may wait till I have absolutely no means of accomplishing it. And then He'll do it through me so I know this wasn't me. I did not realize how late it was. Let's all stand. Charla, would you close for us, please?